What happens when quiet courage collides with raw entitlement 30,000 feet in the air? Why would a teenage violinist's calm refusal to give up her seat spark one of the most dramatic reckonings in aviation history? Imagine sitting in first class in Flight 418 only to be told, you do not belong by a stranger whose privilege feels invincible. That is exactly the moment when Avery Langston, just 16, and carrying her mother's legacy in a single violin case, found herself at the center of a dispute that would ground an entire aircraft and ignite a global conversation. On that flight, Avery did more than hold her ground. She challenged an entire system of bias and inspired an airline to overhaul its policies forever. Can one young woman's quiet strength reshape a corporation and empower millions to stand up against discrimination? Join us as we follow Avery's journey from that tense aisle to the founding of a movement that proves real power is silent, resilient, and built on unwavering dignity. If her story moves, you remember to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single moment of this incredible tale. The soft chime of boarding announcements echoed through the high-ceilinged terminal of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Travelers bustled past one another, dragging wheeled luggage, clutching coffee cups, and scrolling through flight updates. Amid the motion stood Amari Ellis, still and composed, her presence calm like still water in the center of a storm. She didn't dress to be noticed. Her black turtleneck, pressed wool slacks, and sleek low bun were effortless but precise. She wore no logo, no jewelry beyond a slim silver bracelet on her left wrist. She held no outward sign of status, and she liked it that way. To most, she looked like any well-organized woman on a long-haul flight. No one would guess she held 41% ownership in Skynova Airlines, or that she personally oversaw the global expansion that had transformed the once-failing carrier into a household name. As she approached the gate marked Flight 418 to Vienna, she nodded politely to the agent and scanned her boarding pass. The screen blinked green. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Ellis," the gate agent said, eyes flicking briefly to the name but unaware of the significance. "You're in 1A today." "Thank you," Amari replied gently, stepping onto the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, first class shimmered in sleek, soft gray leather and polished walnut paneling. The air smelled faintly of bergamot and new upholstery. Amari walked with quiet confidence to the first row. She placed her leather tote in the overhead bin and slid gracefully into Seat 1A, right by the window. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the past week lift slightly from her shoulders. But there had been back-to-back investor meetings, a late-night board vote in Tokyo, and an emergency with a grounding recall. No one knew that the woman now seated in 1A was the very one who had authorized the repair program that saved the airline's reputation. She didn't need the credit. Only the results mattered. As the cabin continued to fill, Amari closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of peace. It didn't last long. A sharp voice rang out from the aisle. "Excuse me, that's my seat." Amari looked up to find a woman standing over her, expensively dressed in an ivory coat with a designer scarf knotted neatly at her throat. Her expression carried an air of practiced entitlement. "I believe you're in my seat," the woman repeated, louder this time. A few nearby passengers turned to glance. Amari offered a gentle, diplomatic smile. "This is Seat 1A. Would you like me to check your boarding pass?" The woman's lips pressed thin. "No, I don't need to check anything. I always book 1A. I'm on this flight every month. There must be a mistake." Before Amari could respond, a young male flight attendant approached. His name tag read Dylan. "Everything all right here?" he asked, glancing between the two women. This girl is in my seat, the woman snapped. Amari felt the word girl like a splinter. She was 38. She remained composed. Dylan turned to Amari with an apologetic look. Ma'am, may I just double-check your boarding pass? Amari handed it to him without hesitation. Dylan scanned it, paused, then blinked. Seat 1A is correct. Ms. Ellis is right where she's supposed to be. The woman scoffed. Well, then who messed up my reservation? This is absurd. I always get 1A, always. I'm Virginia Lockhart, in case that means something. Amari remained silent, watching. She had no intention of making a scene. She wanted to see what the system would do. That's why she flew commercial. Dylan's voice softened. Ms. Lockhart, let me see your pass. Virginia held it out with a huff. Dylan's eyes darted down. You're actually in 3C today. Ma'am? Excuse me. That's a mistake. I paid for this seat. I know the CEO of this airline personally. He will not be pleased. Amari almost smiled. Dylan, now visibly uncomfortable. Tried again. I'll do everything I can to make sure you're comfortable in 3C. Would you like a pre-departure drink while we get everyone seated? Virginia's eyes narrowed at Amari. This is ridiculous. You think you can just waltz into first class like you belong here? There it was. Amari kept her voice even. I didn't waltz. I boarded like everyone else. You people, Virginia muttered, shaking her head as she turned. Always pushing in where you're not supposed to be. Dylan's mouth opened, but Amari gently raised a hand, stopping him. Her voice was calm and low. It's all right, she said. She'll seat herself soon enough. Virginia stormed down the aisle toward 3C, her designer heels clicking like accusations. Dylan leaned in. I'm so sorry, Ms. Ellis. That shouldn't have happened. Amari nodded once. Thank you. Dylan. He paused. You're not just a regular flyer, are you? She smiled faintly. Not quite. As Dylan stepped away to attend to other passengers, Amari gazed out the window. The sky outside was turning from steel gray to a soft orange pink. The sun was rising. So was the tension. She knew this wasn't over, but she also knew something Virginia didn't. This wasn't her seat because she bought it. It was hers because she built the plane, the route, the software, and the silence between every decision that had made Flight 418 possible. Let them underestimate her. Let them think she didn't belong. Sometimes power doesn't raise its voice. It just listens and waits. The hum of the engines was steady and soft, like the whisper of a lullaby for those already tucked into their seats. Up front, business class passengers were settling in with glasses of orange juice or cranberry spritzers in hand. Conversation was light, mostly murmured. Overhead compartments clicked shut. A baby cried faintly from the back. Saraphina Rivers had always loved the quiet before takeoff. It was like the moment before a bow draws across strings, the stillness before something grand begins. She ran her hand along the edge of her seat. 2-0, window side. Her violin case sat snug beside her in the overhead bin. Every time she boarded a plane, she carried it herself. It was more than just an instrument. It was her story, her history, her mother's legacy. She glanced at her boarding pass again, not because she doubted it, but because it had become a habit. 2-0, first class. The seat her father had booked as a small celebration. She had just won the regional competition in Charleston, at only 16. She was being recruited by conservatories she'd once only seen in glossy brochures. She smiled at the memory of her dad's proud voice over the phone. He was supposed to be in Brazil for a summit, but when he heard she'd won, he rebooked his return flight. told her to come meet him in Dubai, said he had a surprise waiting. As she eased into the leather seat, adjusting the armrest, a shadow loomed to her right. She looked up and saw a tall man in a pressed navy blazer. His face was pale, his jaw stiff. He didn't say hello. "You're in my seat," the man said curtly, without even a glance at her. Saraphina blinked. "I think this is 2A. That's what's on my ticket," he sighed. "I fly this route twice a month. That's my seat. Maybe they bumped you from economy by mistake." There was no malice in his voice. It was flat, even polite in a detached way. But it wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. The way his eyes never really landed on her face. How he glanced past her like she wasn't fully there. Saraphina held up her boarding pass. No mistake. "This is my seat." He didn't look at it. Behind him, a flight attendant approached, smile tight, hands clasped like she was praying to avoid a scene. "Is there a problem here?" she asked quickly. "Yes," the man said, before Saraphina could answer. "She's in my seat. Can we get this sorted?" The flight attendant turned to Saraphina, and her smile faded slightly. "Miss, could I see your ticket?" Saraphina hesitated. She was used to people second-guessing her, at stores, at competitions, even at hotel desks when she checked in under her father's name. But something about this moment felt different. She felt smaller somehow, despite knowing exactly who she was. Still, she handed over the boarding pass. The attendant studied it, lips pursed. "Well," she said, "it looks like you have the correct seat, but we do have an open spot in economy if you'd like to switch and avoid the confusion." The words landed like a slap. Saraphina stared at her. "Why would I switch? I'm supposed to be here." The man was already reaching for the overhead bin. He pulled down his bag and placed it by his feet, preparing to sit without another word. "Sir, if you could please wait," the attendant said, but her voice was weak. Saraphina stood up, heart pounding. She didn't want to make a scene, but this wasn't about a seat anymore. "I'm not moving," she said quietly. "This is my seat." For a second, no one moved. The attendant gave a nervous laugh. "Sweetheart, maybe let's not make this a thing. It's just a seat." Saraphina sat back down, hands trembling slightly. Her voice was low, but firm. "It's not just a seat. It's the assumption that I don't belong here, that I must be wrong, that I need to move to make someone else comfortable. I'm not doing that anymore." She looked out the window, blinking hard. Across the aisle, a woman in her 50s lowered her magazine. She said nothing, but her eyes met Saraphina's. There was something like apology in them, like she'd seen this before and never spoken up. The man backed away a step, his face reddening. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I don't have time for this." He turned to the attendant. "I'll sit in 2B, but someone needs to speak to the gate crew about this." The attendant nodded and moved off, eager to escape. Saraphina exhaled slowly. Her body was still tense. She stared down at her hands. Her fingers felt cold, disconnected from the warmth of her violin case above. She could feel the eyes on her, the hush that follows when someone refuses to shrink. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A text from her dad, landing in 12. "Can't wait to see my champion." She stared at it for a moment, then typed back. "Something happened on the plane. Might be nothing. I'll tell you when I see you." Another message came seconds later. "Want me to call someone?" She looked around the cabin, at the way the attendant still avoided her eyes, at the man beside her, fuming into his seat. She hesitated. Then she typed a reply, "Maybe. Just stay close." The engines began to roar louder as the plane started taxiing. The overhead lights dimmed slightly, but inside Saraphina, something had lit up. A quiet fire that didn't rage, but burned steady. She thought about her mom, about the way she used to tell her that showing up as yourself in a world that doesn't expect you to is an act of power. She wasn't going to move. Not for a man who couldn't see her. Not for a flight attendant who smiled but didn't protect her. Not even to make everyone else more comfortable. She had earned this seat. She had every right to stay in it, and she would. Even if it meant everything around her had to stop to recognize it. The soft hum of the plane's engines filled the silence after the awkward standoff. Passengers had either returned to their own conversations or continued to glance back with quiet curiosity, unsure whether they had just witnessed a minor incident or the first tremors of something far larger. Soleil Harper sat silently in her assigned seat now, her slim fingers gripping the edge of the armrest. The burn of humiliation still prickled under her skin, but she kept her chin up. Her mother's hand lay gently on her forearm, a silent reminder that she was not alone. Evelyn Harper didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her presence was enough. Soleil looked out the window, pretending to admire the tarmac, even as her mind kept circling the same question. Why had that man chosen her? She hadn't been loud. She hadn't even spoken before being challenged. The ticket had been scanned. The seat was legally hers. Still, that man Brandon Teller acted like she was in the wrong simply by existing in that row. In first class, in that seat, wearing that calm, collected expression, the same way she had seen her father do, 1,000 times, in boardrooms where people made assumptions before he even spoke. Except now it was happening to her, and it stung in a way she hadn't expected. From row 5 a pair of observant eyes narrowed. A woman named Jocelyn Ward, mid-50s, well-dressed but understated, had been watching everything. She wasn't scrolling through her phone like the others. She wasn't whispering into someone's ear. She was simply watching. She had seen the moment Soleil was stopped. She had heard the word sweetheart spill from Brandon Teller's mouth like a sour stain. She had noticed the smug smirk on his face when the flight attendant didn't object, and she had seen Soleil hold her ground with grace her age belied. Jocelyn Ward wasn't a stranger to quiet discrimination. As a civil rights attorney for over 2 decades, she had watched the way injustice dressed itself in new clothes every generation. It didn't always come as a shout. Sometimes it came as a smile, a chuckle, a passive shrug from someone in uniform. She pulled out her notebook from her bag, the old-fashioned kind, leather-bound. She always traveled with it, for moments just like this. Back in row, Soleil closed her eyes and drew a breath through her nose. She could feel her pulse slowly leveling. Her training kicked in. Her father had taught her how to breathe through moments like these. 3 seconds in. Hold. 4 seconds out. Remember who you are. Remember what you carry. But even as she steadied herself, a bitter voice in the back of her mind asked if she had really won anything. Sure. She had sat down, but so had Teller, and the flight crew had moved on like nothing happened. Was that the price of composure? To survive with a smile while others walked away thinking they had done nothing wrong. Evelyn leaned toward her daughter and whispered, "You don't have to make peace with this." Soleil blinked. Her mother rarely gave voice to her fire. She was all softness and wisdom. But in that moment, there was something steely under her words. "I'm not," Soleil whispered back. I'm just not sure what to do." Not yet. Meanwhile, a quiet discussion unfolded in the galley. Flight attendant Megan Davis stood stiffly behind the curtain. Her crewmate Kevin leaned in, speaking low. "You saw what happened. You let that guy speak to her like that." "I didn't want to escalate," Megan muttered, crossing her arms. "It would have caused a scene." Kevin's jaw tensed. "You think that wasn't a scene? You let her take the heat. She's just a kid. She's in first class. She can handle herself." Kevin didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "She's a kid. He's a grown man who lied to her face. And you let it go." From the jump seat, Zara, the newest flight attendant on board, shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't said a word. Not when Soleil had been stopped. Not when Megan waved it off. She had been too afraid. But now she wished she had spoken. In row 5, Jocelyn tore out the page from her notebook, folded it 3 times, and slipped it into her coat pocket. She wasn't sure if she would use it, but she wasn't going to forget what she had seen. And something told her this wasn't the end of it. Teller, across the aisle, had settled into his seat. He ordered a Bloody Mary and chuckled to himself as he read a market update on his tablet. "Can you believe this turbulence already?" he joked to the passenger beside him, a man who gave a polite, nervous laugh. But Teller's gaze kept drifting to Soleil. He didn't like the look on her face. She didn't look embarrassed anymore. She looked patient, dangerously patient. Soleil didn't even glance at him. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a worn paperback novel, her favorite escape. But even as her fingers turned the pages, her thoughts were 1,000 miles away. What if this happened to someone who didn't know how to respond? What if she had been her little cousin, Asha, or her friend Lanny, who always second-guessed herself? What if this wasn't about just her seat, but 1,000 invisible seats taken every day from someone like her? Her mind sharpened. Something ignited in her chest. Not fury, not despair, but a clarity that came only when your identity had been challenged in public. You could either shrink or you could grow roots. And Soleil Harper had no intention of shrinking. The pilot's voice crackled on the intercom, giving routine instructions. The doors were now sealed. The aircraft taxied toward the runway. A storm brewed over the East Coast. The skies ahead would be turbulent. But inside row 1, a different kind of storm had already taken shape, and this one wasn't going to pass quietly. For a few long seconds, silence blanketed the cabin like a heavy fog. Then came the first whisper. A middle-aged man in 2D, dressed in a sharp gray suit, leaned toward his wife and murmured something behind his hand. She looked up, eyes flicking to Amira, then quickly away, as if embarrassed to be caught watching. Amira straightened her back, feeling every eye and every breath around her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. But inside, her thoughts stirred like a storm just beneath the surface. She wished she could talk to her father. She wished she could hear his voice again. She had dialed him, but there was no answer. Just the long, measured hum of a call that rang and rang, unreturned, sitting in coach. That would have been easier. Being invisible would have been easier. But she had the ticket, the seat, the right, and the sense of self-worth that refused to bend just to make others more comfortable with her presence. From the flight deck, the captain's voice came through again, this time clipped and sharper. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Please remain seated. We are temporarily grounded due to an unexpected delay at the gate." The buzz in the cabin thickened. A ripple of confusion ran through the aisles. Some passengers checked their watches. Others turned their heads, clearly annoyed, but uncertain about the cause. Flight attendant Cheryl Hastings, the one who had first approached Amira with the challenge about her seat, was pacing near the galley now. Her eyes darted to her colleague, Oscar, and then to the cockpit. She didn't look as sure of herself anymore. Amira watched her, then turned her gaze toward the window. The tarmac lights flickered like stars across the pavement. Her own reflection stared back, and for a second, she saw not herself, but her younger self, at 9 years old, crying in a school hallway after being called a name she hadn't understood at the time, but felt in her chest. She had promised herself then she would never shrink. She heard footsteps approach, heels quick but hesitant. A woman South Asian, probably in her late 20s, hair in a neat bun, knelt quietly beside her. "Miss Ellington," the woman said softly. Amira turned. "Yes, I'm Zara, one of the new flight attendants. I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. I wanted you to know some of us. We see you." Amira blinked, surprised by the sincerity. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Zara nodded and stood, but before she turned away, she pressed a bottle of water into Amira's hand. A simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like an act of quiet defiance, not against the airline, but against the silence. 2 rows ahead, Brent Calloway sat rigid in his stolen seat. His jaw was tight, arms crossed. He looked more like a man who had something to prove than someone enjoying an upgrade. His wife, Lillian, seemed anxious, her eyes flitting between passengers and her husband, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the armrest a little too hard. Amira wondered, not for the first time, what people like Brent feared when they looked at her. She was 16. She was reading a book before she was interrupted. She wasn't loud. She wasn't angry. She simply existed in a space someone like him believed wasn't hers to occupy. But Amira didn't move. Oscar, the younger flight attendant who had watched the whole thing play out, finally approached Brent. His voice was hushed but urgent. "Sir, may I speak with you for a moment in the galley?" Brent scoffed. "I'm not moving. She didn't belong here in the first place. That's not what I asked. Sir, this is a procedural request. Then get your captain out here. Or better yet, go back and do your job." The tone was unmistakable. Oscar's face stiffened, but he turned and walked back toward the galley without another word. At that moment, Amira's phone vibrated in her hand. Incoming call. Dad. She picked up immediately. Dad Amira. Her father's voice was calm, but there was an edge she recognized, a controlled fury. "I tried to call earlier," she said quietly. "I was in the air, in a holding pattern. I just landed in San Diego and saw everything." Her heart skipped. "You saw? It's all over social media. Some passenger on your flight uploaded the video already. I've spoken with the airline's executive director. They're scrambling. They didn't know who you were, or that you were booked through my account. I told them," she said softly. "They didn't care." "I care," he said, "and now they will." The call dropped just as the intercom clicked on again. "This is Captain Ramirez. At this time, we will not be departing until a supervisory decision is made regarding a seating dispute in first class." Now the murmurs became audible complaints. "What dispute? What's going on up there first class again? Huh." Some passengers craned their necks to look ahead. Amira sat, hands folded on her lap, trying to breathe evenly. Brent, in contrast, looked rattled. "You're grounding the whole plane over this," he barked toward the crew. Over her. He pointed. Actually pointed. There was an audible gasp from a woman 2 rows behind. Zara reappeared at Amira's side, her voice firmer now. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice. Immediately. You don't get to talk to me like that." "Sir." A new voice cut in. This one belonged to a man in a dark uniform stepping on board through the front entrance. He wore a security badge, and behind him, a second uniformed woman followed. "We're here to speak to Mr. Brent Calloway." Brent's mouth fell open. Lillian looked like she might faint. Amira looked down at her phone again. A new message lit up the screen. From Dad. "Stay calm. It's being handled." She closed her eyes, willing her heart to slow. For the first time since she boarded, the balance of power had shifted, and everyone knew it. For a few minutes there was quiet. Too quiet. Alani sat rigid in the seat she never should have had to fight for. Her small hands rested on her violin case, knuckles pale against the glossy surface. She didn't look at Mr. Peters, who had gone silent after the captain's call. His body was stiff, jaw clenched, and he kept tapping his fingers on the armrest like he needed to prove something with every beat. Like he hadn't lost. Not yet. Across the aisle, passengers shifted in their seats. A whisper passed from row to row, like static electricity right before a storm. Some passengers glanced at Alani with a flicker of curiosity, others with awkward avoidance. One woman even offered a hesitant smile, but Alani didn't return it. She wasn't being rude. She was just tired. Tired of being someone others didn't expect to belong. Meanwhile, down in the galley, Darlene, the flight attendant who had first escorted Alani away, paced nervously. Her headset buzzed. She tapped it. "Repeat that. Please," she said. Voice cracking. A voice came through again. Firmer this time. "Security from corporate is inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Captain Reynolds has requested all crew remain calm and cooperate." Darlene's heart sank. She hadn't expected it to go this far. She thought she'd been handling a situation. She didn't like how entitled the girl seemed. Didn't like the way she had spoken so directly. But now, it wasn't about personal dislike anymore. This was protocol. Legal. Risk management. And she was in the middle of it. She looked down the aisle toward where Alani sat. So still. Too still. Darlene had seen that kind of posture before. Kids who'd grown up learning how not to make sudden movements. Kids who had to shrink in spaces that didn't welcome them. That same gnawing feeling from earlier returned to Darlene's chest. But before she could act on it, the co-pilot walked briskly down the aisle and slipped her a folded note. "From the flight deck," he said. She opened it and read the short, neat handwriting, "Hold cabin. Prepare for all operations to pause." Darlene blinked. Pause all operations. That meant meals, drink service, even Wi-Fi. The airline only issued that order in the rarest of circumstances. A blackout order. Mid-flight. Something big was happening. Back in seat 3A. A young man named Marcus leaned forward, whispering to his partner. They were digital consultants from Atlanta, heading to a music tech conference in San Francisco. Marcus had recognized Alani instantly. "That's Alani Blake," he murmured. "You remember the foundation that funded those community music centers in 5 cities. That was her dad. She's the face of it." His partner raised an eyebrow. "You're saying a kid like that owns part of this airline?" Marcus gave a slight nod. The Blake Initiative helped fund Horizon Air's post-pandemic recovery. Bought in at the ground floor. I read the article last year. They basically saved the company. Their conversation trailed off as the intercom dinged again. "Ladies and gentlemen, This is your captain speaking. We are currently experiencing an unexpected delay in flight path confirmation. We appreciate your continued patience. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened until further notice. The announcement was sterile, calm, neutral, but the energy on board was not. Peters let out a bitter laugh under his breath. Flight path confirmation? Is that what we're calling it now? Alani ignored him, but her heart thudded in her chest. She could feel it coming. Not violence, not exactly, but a confrontation, something unseen, like the rumble beneath tectonic plates just before they shift. She took a slow breath, recalling her father's voice from years ago. When they don't see your worth, you don't scream, you stand. You look them in the eye and let them meet your calm. That's more powerful than any raised voice. Still, it was hard. Her fingers itched to send another message, but her father hadn't replied to the first yet. What was he doing? Who was he calling? Was the plane really about to stop midair? She had so many questions. And then, row 9 stood up. A woman with dark red lipstick and a matching scarf, phone in hand, turned around and spoke loudly enough for several rows to hear. I'm sorry, but is no one going to acknowledge that a teenage girl had her seat taken and was dismissed by crew while a grown man got a free upgrade? Seriously, are we just pretending this didn't happen? A couple of people clapped. Others turned away, but it was enough. The spell of silence was broken. Alani looked up, surprised. The woman in row 9 locked eyes with her. You're not alone, sweetheart, she said. Some of us see it. Something shifted in Alani's chest. It wasn't relief exactly, more like recognition. The kind that doesn't fix everything, but reminds you you're not invisible. Peters muttered something under his breath. Alani turned her head. What was that? She asked. Voice soft. He smirked. I said if you want a seat so badly, maybe you should earn it the normal way. Not with rich daddies and race cards. The words didn't hurt like they used to. They hit the surface, tried to dig in, but there was something in Alani now that kept them from finding purchase. I did earn it, she replied, still calm, not just with money, but with grace and patience. He rolled his eyes. And you, she added, earned a spotlight. I hope you're ready for it. She turned away before she could see his reaction. Moments later, the cabin lights dimmed briefly. The overhead screens blinked, then displayed a single line of text. This flight is temporarily grounded at altitude. Please await further instructions. A soft collective gasp rippled through the passengers. Peters stood up, furious. What the hell is this? You people are letting a child shut down a flight now. Flight attendant Javi approached swiftly. Sir, please take your seat. Peters' voice grew louder. This is a joke. I have rights. I have. You also have the right to disembark, said a new voice, calm and firm. All heads turned. A man in a sleek gray suit stood at the front of the cabin, flanked by 2 individuals with Horizon Air corporate security badges. The man held a tablet and spoke with quiet authority. My name is Nolan Carr. I'm Director of Ethics and Passenger Safety at Horizon Air. We are here to assess an in-flight civil escalation. The cabin went dead silent. Alani's breath caught in her throat, and Peters'. For the first time in 2 hours, he sat down, hard. He knew that name. Everyone in aviation did. And this was no longer just about a seat. This was about accountability. This was about consequences. And Alani Young, black, dignified, was at the very center of it. For a long moment, the cabin was silent. The kind of silence that followed a lightning strike. Tense, Electric. Every passenger seemed to hold their breath, watching the scene in disbelief. Avery sat frozen, her cheeks still stinging from the humiliation, her hands clenched in her lap. The seat beside her, the one that should have been hers, was occupied by the man who had smirked as if entitled to it all. Captain Langley stood tall in the aisle. His voice had just rung through the intercom, addressing the injustice in a way no one expected. His presence alone was enough to change the air pressure in the room. "Miss Avery Langston is to be treated with the respect she deserves," he had said. "She is not only a passenger. She is a representation of everything this company claims to stand for." Now, all eyes turned to him as he slowly walked toward the front. A middle-aged woman in 4C gave a small clap. It was hesitant, unsure. Then a man near the back stood up and added his applause, and suddenly, like dominoes, more passengers joined in clapping, some rising to their feet, some shouting things like, "Finally and about time." The applause wasn't loud, it wasn't roaring, but it was honest. It was enough. Brenda, the flight attendant who had started the chain of events, stood frozen beside the galley. Her clipboard hung limp at her side. Her mouth parted slightly, like she wanted to speak, to justify herself, but no sound came out. Officer Miller returned to the scene with confusion in his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked Captain Langley. "You're dismissed," Langley replied without looking at him. "This matter is no longer in your hands." "You can't tell me I outrank you in this airspace," Langley interrupted. "And unless you'd like to explain to federal oversight why you attempted to remove a minor from her rightful seat based on a single passenger's accusation without any evidence, I suggest you walk off this plane before you're escorted." Miller's jaw worked silently for a second. Then he looked at Brenda, who gave him nothing. She wouldn't meet his gaze. He turned on his heel and left. And just like that, the threat was gone. But Avery's body was still tense. Her arms still trembled. Her mother, Camille, reached over and gently cupped her daughter's hands. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." Avery looked up at her mom, blinking back tears. "Why did they do that to me? I didn't do anything." Camille's voice cracked. "I know, baby, I know." Captain Langley knelt beside her seat, lowering himself to her eye level. "Avery," he said gently, "I want to apologize. Not as a captain, but as a person who should have spoken up the moment I saw this happen. You were wronged, and we're going to make this right." Avery stared at him, unsure. "Why do you care now?" Langley didn't flinch. "Because sometimes we stay quiet too long, and silence causes damage. I don't want to be silent anymore." Camille looked at him with a new kind of expression. She was still protective, still cautious, but a flicker of something softened her features. Trust, not quite, but maybe the beginning of it. Langley rose and turned to the passengers. "I want to thank you all for your patience," he said, "but I won't insult you by pretending this was routine. What happened here was unacceptable. This flight will continue. But first, I need to speak with my crew." He motioned for Brenda and the co-pilot to follow him to the cockpit. Before she left, Brenda passed Camille without a word, her jaw tight and eyes glassy. She didn't look at Avery, not even once. As the door to the cockpit closed, murmurs filled the cabin again. Strangers exchanged looks, soft comments passing between them. One woman leaned over to Camille from across the aisle. "She's brave, your daughter," she said with a warm smile. "I don't know many adults who would have held it together like that." Camille nodded, brushing a curl from Avery's face. "She gets that from her grandmother." A few rows back, a man whispered into his phone. "Yeah, Something happened. The captain just called out the staff. No, seriously, it's wild. I think the girl's father is someone huge. Word was spreading like wildfire. In the cockpit, the conversation wasn't gentle. Langley turned to Brenda with steel in his voice. What were you thinking? Brenda's lips quivered. I followed protocol. No, you followed bias. I was just trying to do my job. She snapped. You failed. You didn't verify her ticket. You ignored a child's voice. You escalated a non-issue into a near-federal violation. The co-pilot stayed silent, watching. Langley continued. You will remain seated in the jump seat for the remainder of the flight. No further interaction with passengers. You're being reported to the airline's ethics board. HR will contact you upon landing. Do you understand? Brenda's eyes welled with tears. Yes, Captain. As Langley stepped out of the cockpit again, he looked down the aisle and saw Avery sitting straighter now, her hands no longer trembling. And beside her, Camille's gaze met his for just a second. There was still fire in her eyes, still suspicion, but also the smallest nod of acknowledgement. He had taken a step. Back in her seat, Avery turned toward the window. The sky outside was orange, warm with sunset. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, but strong. For the first time since the incident started, she let herself breathe. The seat was hers again, not just the cushion, but her dignity, her presence, her place, and no one could take that from her again. The cabin door opened once more, and 3 figures stepped through, moving with a purpose that made every head turn. At their lead was Nolan Carr, Director of Ethics and Passenger Safety for Horizon Air. His suit was impeccably tailored and his expression calm but authoritative. Beside him walked 2 aides carrying leather portfolios. The crew froze in place, as though the room had transformed into a stage where every movement mattered. Nolan raised his hand slightly, signaling for quiet. His voice carried easily over the hush that fell. Good evening, everyone, he began. I am Nolan Carr. On behalf of Horizon Air and our parent company, I want to address the events that have transpired in first class. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. No passenger should ever feel unwelcome or dismissed. What happened to Miss Avery Langston was unacceptable and does not reflect our values. Avery's heart pounded as the entire cabin focused on her. She sat straighter, hands folded on her lap. Her mother, Camille, reached down and squeezed her hand. Avery felt warmth spread through her, a quiet courage ignited by the presence of someone powerful, acknowledging her pain. Nolan turned to Brenda Collins, who stood off to the side of the aisle, head bowed. Flight Attendant Collins, Nolan said, his tone firm but fair. Our investigation confirms that you violated our non-discrimination policy by allowing a passenger's bias to dictate his access to first class and by failing to verify Miss Langston's ticket before enforcing your own assumptions. Brenda trembled. She tried to look Nolan in the eye but could not. He continued, Your conduct has caused harm. You are hereby suspended, pending a full review, and you will receive training designed to address implicit bias and proper protocol. Brenda shook as if struck. She mouthed a silent apology to Avery before being guided gently by one of Nolan's aides toward the door. The rest of the crew watched, stunned. No one stirred to defend Brenda. The silence now felt like justice taking its first breath. Turning back to the passengers, Nolan's voice softened. To Miss Langston and all who witnessed this injustice, we apologize deeply. We will refund every passenger on this flight and provide vouchers for future travel. Additionally, we will make Miss Langston's journey comfortable for the remainder of the flight and beyond. Our senior leadership is personally committed to ensuring this never happens again." Gasps and murmurs of approval rippled through first class. Some passengers wiped tears from their eyes. Others simply sat in stunned relief. One man leaned over to Camille and whispered, "I've never seen anything like this. She handled it with such dignity." Camille nodded, brushing a tear from Avery's cheek. Nolan stepped down the aisle and stopped at Avery's seat. He knelt to her level. His dark eyes met hers. "Miss Langston, I cannot undo how you were treated," he said gently. "But I promise you that Horizon Air will learn and change. Please accept this token." He offered a small envelope. Inside is priority boarding for life, a full refund, and a donation to the Avery Langston Music Foundation in your name. Avery looked at the envelope, heart swelling. She had started the foundation herself weeks ago, but never expected it to be recognized in this way. She found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. Words filled her throat, but she held them steady. "I appreciate your apology and your promise to change." Her gaze shifted to the cabin. "Thank you all for standing by me." A ripple of applause rose again, more genuine this time, filled with gratitude and solidarity. Camille stood and hugged her daughter tight. Passengers in the row behind joined in a spontaneous standing ovation. Avery closed her eyes, savoring the moment. She had dreamed of playing her violin at sold-out halls, of changing the world with music and philanthropy. But today she realized that changing hearts could begin with a single seat. Nolan straightened and addressed the crew. "You will receive additional guidance on handling any passenger concern equitably, and Captain Langley will oversee any further decisions on this flight." He offered a respectful nod to Captain Langley, who returned it with quiet pride. As Nolan and his team filed back toward the galley, the cabin energy shifted. Smiles flickered across faces. Seats that had felt charged with tension now felt warm. Avery sank back into her seat, the envelope pressed against her heart like a promise of future possibilities. Minutes later, the captain's voice appeared on the intercom, gentle and unhurried. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have resolved the in-flight matter. We will be taxiing shortly and expect to depart on schedule. Thank you for your patience and understanding." The soft click of seatbelts releasing followed, and the cabin buzzed with relieved conversation. Avery glanced out her window at the runway lights beneath the fading twilight. In that reflection, she saw a young girl who had endured injustice and emerged stronger. She thought of her grandmother's words about roots and resilience. She felt those roots deepen. "Mom," she said, voice small, "I think I can play my concert now." Camille smiled, tears still shining. "I know you will, sweetheart." And as the plane rolled forward, Avery closed her eyes, breathing deep, ready to step into every seat life had in store for her, undaunted, unbroken, and absolutely seen. The cabin hummed with a new energy as passengers settled back into their seats. Glasses refilled, hushed conversations resumed, and the faint clink of ice in crystal cups marked a tentative return to normalcy. But beneath the surface, a quiet transformation had taken place. Oh, no longer was this simply Flight 418 from Seattle to Vienna. It was the cabin that had witnessed a reckoning. Avery Langston watched from her window seat as ground crew signaled the pilots. The runway lights streamed past in a blur of gold and white. She felt the gentle nudge as the engine spooled up again, ready for takeoff. Yet she did not lean back into her cushion. Instead, she glanced around, taking in faces that now bore a hint of respect, curiosity, even admiration. Camille Langston sat beside her, brushing a stray curl from Avery's forehead. "You did that?" she said softly. "You changed everything." Avery looked at her mother and smiled faintly. "We did that," she replied, "together." Moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back on board. Before we begin our flight to Vienna, I would like to make a special announcement regarding passenger safety and our company values." There was a pause, and then his tone grew more personal. "It has come to our attention that a criminal complaint has been filed against Mr. Peters for his actions earlier this evening. He will remain on the ground until further notice and is banned from all Horizon Air partner flights for life." A murmur of approval swept through first class. Avery felt warm pride bloom in her chest. Mr. Peters had tried to wield privilege like thunder. Instead, he was struck by lightning. But there was more. Captain Langley cleared his throat. "In addition, our board of directors has authorized a new initiative to safeguard all passengers from discrimination. This initiative will include immediate implementation of new training protocols, mandatory bias education for every employee, and the creation of an independent ethics oversight committee." Among the crew, Zara Patel exchanged a relieved glance with Kevin Marshall. They had both felt the tension and now sensed a meaningful shift. Flight attendant Brenda Collins, however, sat stiffly in a jump seat near the rear, eyes downcast. She was still suspended, pending review and training. The entire cabin had seen her fall from power. From her seat, Avery caught Nolan Carr's eye as he managed the announcement. He offered her a reassuring nod before returning to his aides, who were already preparing documents to present to the pilot. Avery wondered what else was unfolding behind the scenes. As the aircraft leveled off and the fastened seatbelt signs dimmed, Camille leaned close. "Your phone is ringing." Avery pulled her phone from her jacket pocket. The screen displayed an incoming video call from Jackson Langston. She pressed accept. "Hello, sweetheart." Her father's face appeared, framed by dark wood walls and warm library light. He wore a crisp white shirt, no tie. His eyes were bright with pride and relief. "Dad." Avery breathed, the tension leaking out of her body. "Everything is okay now?" He nodded, eyes moist. "I saw. I'll never forget you sitting there. So calm. You were brave. Avery." She looked out at the clouds racing past. "It felt like I had no choice." "You always have a choice," he replied. "But you chose with honor. I've already spoken to Horizon's CEO, Marisol Vega. They're on board with the ethics committee and new training. They want to thank you personally." Avery felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't need thanks. I just want everyone to be treated the same." Her father smiled, his expression tender. "That's why we started the Langston Foundation. We believe opportunity should be universal. You've just helped ignite that change." Below, first-class lights brightened as silver trays appeared. The soft rustle of menus reminded Avery that dining service would continue, but she barely noticed the lobster bisque or the champagne flute arriving in front of her. Her mind was on the larger world that lay beyond these clouds. On the other side of the aisle, a man tapped his glass to get Camille's attention. He leaned over. "Mrs. Langston, I'm Detective James Krupp from the Port Authority. We'll have Mr. Peters for questioning once we land. I wanted to commend your daughter for how she handled herself." Camille nodded, her shoulders relaxing. "Thank you. I'm grateful." Detective Krupp glanced at Avery. "She's remarkable." Avery smiled shyly and returned to her father's call. "Everyone is talking about you," he said. "I saw the trending hashtag, 'I'm proud of you, kiddo.'" She covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. "Hashtag Rocker Seat Justice," he replied. "It's everywhere." Camille pressed play on the discreet newsfeed on the seatback screen. The headline read, "Teen Hero Shuts Down Discrimination Aboard Flight Airline Grounded in Solidarity." The clip showed Nolan Carr's apology, camera panning to Avery as she accepted the envelope with tears in her eyes. The anchor's voice captured the moment perfectly in a stunning display of courage and calm. Avery Langston forced an airline to confront its own biases. Avery's cheeks warmed. She slid the screen off before more passengers could look. "I've never been in a headline before." Her father laughed proudly. "Then this is a first, and not a bad one." She took a slow breath, gazing out at the endless sky. "Do you think it really changes things, Dad?" He rested his hand on her shoulder, his grip steady. "I know it does. You've shown people that standing up for justice can be peaceful and powerful. You've given them permission to speak up too." Below. The cabin lights dimmed again, signaling in-flight entertainment. But few passengers chose movies. Instead, they leaned in, talking in small groups about what they had witnessed. The cabin had become a forum for conversation, reflection, and hope. It was as if a seed had been planted. They would carry this moment to airports, cities, and offices around the world. A flight attendant named Oscar Martinez approached, offering sparkling water. He paused before handing it to Avery. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have done more earlier." Avery accepted the bottle. "Thank you," she said. "I know it wasn't easy." He nodded. "You reminded me why we choose this job. I won't forget it." He gave a small bow and returned to service. Avery turned back to her mother. Camille's eyes were glistening, her pride shining. Avery leaned her head on Camille's shoulder. "I'm tired," she murmured. Camille kissed the top of her daughter's hair. "Rest now. You earned it." As the plane cruised over the Rockies, sun dipping below the peaks, Avery closed her eyes. In her mind, she replayed the evening's events, the challenge in her seat, the refusal to give in, the captain's interjection, Nolan Carr's apology, and the world's awakening. She knew the journey was just beginning. The policies would be written, the ethics committee formed, the bias training delivered. But tonight she had started it. Tonight she had changed a company's future and perhaps the industry's course. And somewhere in the sky, above fields and forests and cities, a teenage girl slept peacefully, knowing that her courage had given countless others the chance to claim their rightful place in the world. The jet bridge detached with a solid thud against the fuselage, and a hush fell over first class. Passengers gathered their belongings, luggage wheels clicking against the cabin floor. The overhead bins clicked open and shut. Avery Langston rose from her seat, her violin case slung gently over her shoulder. She paused at her row to allow others to disembark first, behind her. Camille Langston straightened her coat and offered a warm nod to fellow travelers, who had once seen her daughter as an inconvenience and now saw her as an inspiration. The cabin's atmosphere had shifted completely since the evening began. What had started as a seat dispute had become a journey of reckoning and redemption. Down the aisle, the defeated figure of Brenda Collins appeared, flanked by two Horizon Air security officers. Brenda's head was bowed, her uniform jacket hanging slightly off one shoulder as if she had aged years in a matter of hours. She avoided everyone's eyes, but the eyes of some passengers burned with compassion rather than condemnation. A few offered soft words of encouragement as she passed. "I'm sorry, Ms. Langston," Brenda whispered as she shuffled by, voice barely audible over the murmur of deplaning. Her pale cheeks were wet with tears. Everything she had taken for granted, her authority, Her sense of correctness had been stripped away in a single evening. Avery paused and turned, not out of triumph, but out of empathy. "I know you didn't mean harm," she said quietly. "This is bigger than any of us." Brenda blinked, stunned that the passenger she had wronged was offering mercy. She reached up and brushed a tear across her cheek. "Thank you," she managed. Then she continued toward the rear galley, where the security officers would escort her off the plane. The steps felt heavy. Ahead, Nolan Carr waited just inside the cabin door, his aide standing respectfully to either side. He nodded as Avery approached. "Miss Langston, may I escort you off?" Avery smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Carr." She slipped her arm lightly through his, her violin case resting against her hip. Camille followed close behind, her own arm linked with hers. As they passed through the narrow aisle, passengers offered quiet congratulations, nods, and smiles. Some patted Avery's shoulder. Others whispered, "Well done." Miles Tran, the tech entrepreneur who had discreetly recorded the initial confrontation, lowered his phone and offered a thumbs up. Avery nodded at him gratefully. They reached the door at the rear galley, which faced an empty corridor normally used by crew. Today, it was lined with Port Authority officers and ground staff. A ramp extended down to the tarmac. Avery took a breath, the cool night air washing over her face as she stepped outside. A bright floodlight shone down, casting long shadows across the jet bridge. At the bottom of the ramp, Detective James Krupp waited, uniform pressed and badge gleaming. He gave Avery a respectful salute. "Miss Langston," he said, voice steady. "Thank you for your patience this evening. You helped us enforce the law as much as the airline's policies." Avery offered a small smile. "Thank you for handling it with care." She glanced back at Brenda, now stepping onto the ramp a few feet behind. The former flight attendant's uniform was now a symbol of hard-earned lesson. Camille walked beside Avery, adjusting her daughter's coat against the cool breeze. "You did great, baby," she whispered. "I'm proud of you." Avery felt a wave of relief passing from her head down to her toes. This final walk standard procedure, an exit through the back, felt surreal. Normally passengers left through the main door, welcomed by bustling crowds, baggage handlers, and taxiing vehicles. Tonight, Avery's exit was quiet, dignified, almost ceremonial. Nolan Carr stepped forward to address the officers. "Detective Krupp, Miss Langston, Madame Langston, Ms. Collins will be taken in for questioning, then released into HR's custody. We'll make sure she receives the training she needs." He paused, glancing at Avery. "Miss Langston, we're awaiting a private car to transfer you and your mother to the terminal lounge. Please allow us to escort you." A sleek black SUV sat ready beneath the floodlights, drivers in dark uniforms waiting. Avery exchanged a look with Camille. She took one last look at the plane behind her. The gleaming white fuselage bore the Horizon Air logo, now a symbol not just of travel, but of transformation. She remembered the fear she had felt when confronted by entitlement, the bitterness in Mr. Peters' voice, and the cold assumption that she didn't belong. Then she recalled every moment that followed Captain Langley's intervention, Nolan Carr's apology, the collective awakening of passengers who had refused to stay silent. She turned and climbed into the SUV, her mother joining her on the bench seat. Nolan leaned in through the window. "Miss Langston, once we're in the lounge, they'll present you with the final travel voucher and the official notice of apology from the board. Then, your foundation's press liaison will join you to discuss coverage of this event. We want to amplify your voice. You turned a moment of injustice into a movement." Avery nodded. "Thank you for believing me." He smiled. We had no choice once we saw how you carried yourself." The door closed gently, sealing them in. As the SUV pulled away, Avery pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the jet bridge fade into darkness. A few ground crew workers continued moving equipment, unaware of the story that had just ended here. Camille placed her hand on Avery's knee. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. Avery exhaled. "I want to finish my concert practice. Then I want to meet with the foundation board. And then, maybe get some ice cream." She managed a small laugh. Camille chuckled. "Ice cream sounds perfect." The SUV glided through the airport service roads. The glow of terminal lights guided their path. Through the tinted window, Avery caught glimpses of fellow travelers rolling by in baggage carts. She wondered how many would spot her and whisper about the young woman whose quiet strength had grounded a flight. They arrived at the ornate doors of the VIP lounge. A Horizon Air representative opened the door. Inside, soft lighting, plush chairs, and the aroma of fresh coffee and pastries greeted them. Journalists waited discreetly at the far end, notebooks out. A photographer hovered near the entrance. "Camera ready." Avery felt a flicker of nerves. She smoothed her hair and adjusted her posture. Camille squeezed her hand. Nolan Carr appeared moments later with a silver tray holding 2 champagne flutes and a leather folder. "Welcome to the Skylark Lounge," he said warmly. "We have your escort waiting. Please take your time. We're here for you." Avery took a deep breath and stood. The weight of the evening pressed on her shoulders, but in a way that felt like honor rather than burden. She stepped into the lounge, holding her head high. Cameras clicked softly, flashes illuminating her confident smile. She paused at the threshold, looking back once at Nolan and Camille, then turned forward to face the next stage of her journey. This evening had tested her. It had shown her the power of quiet dignity, the necessity of speaking up, and the potential for real change when individuals refuse to remain silent. Now, as she walked into the lounge of supportive strangers and allies, she knew her fight was far from over, but she also knew she would never walk away again. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through restless city streets and onto glowing smartphone screens. Across the world, people stirred awake to a single image that refused to fade. It was a still frame, capturing every emotion in one shot, a teenage girl seated calmly in a crisp white leather seat, her spine straight and shoulders back, while a red-faced man in a business suit seethed beside her. Above them, the overhead light cast a spotlight on her quiet dignity and his simmering rage. The screen read simply, "Seat Justice." Within seconds, the clip had racked up thousands of views. By lunchtime, it had gone viral, across every social platform. Reactions poured in. A short Twitter thread from a major news outlet summarized the incident. Horizon Air Flight 418 grounded mid-air after white passenger demands black teen give up seat. Teen stands firm. Airline CEO issues apology. That tweet alone earned over 100,000 retweets and 200,000 likes in half a day. Instagram feeds filled with side-by-side images showing expectation versus reality memes. Expectation. Someone quietly yields to privilege. Reality. Teen demands equality and wins. Snapchat streaks shared the 15-second clip with friends. Even TikTokers recreated the moment, acting out the confrontation and the final walk down the jet bridge with dramatic flair. One influencer posted a duet, adding text overlay that read, "When you know your worth, you don't shrink while nodding in approval." Miles Tran, the tech entrepreneur who had filmed the original video, awoke to a flood of notifications. His inbox overflowed with interview requests from podcasts, inquiries from international news agencies, and direct messages from viewers thanking him for recording the truth in real time. Underneath his original upload, comments ranged from shock to solidarity. That kid rocked it. This is why we need to support young voices. Privilege has no place on a plane. The digital echo chamber had transformed a personal act of courage into a global conversation. At Horizon Air headquarters in Chicago, the boardroom was abuzz. The day after the incident, glass walls reflected frantic activity. Executives huddled around video monitors that looped the clip. Policy documents lay open, side eyes darting between lines of text and the social media metrics glowing on screens. The CEO, Marisol Vega, stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes determined. Marisol had woken up to the same video trending on her phone, the subject line in her inbox reading urgent viral video. She had watched it twice before gathering her senior team. "This is our moment of reckoning," she began. "Not only do we need to fix what went wrong on that flight, we need to own it. We need to be the standard for change, not just a reactive company. Otherwise, this story will bury us." In New York, the morning talk shows aired panel discussions dissecting the event. A civil rights lawyer argued for mandatory federal oversight of airline bias training. A sociologist spoke of microaggressions in everyday life, how they erode trust and dignity. A former flight attendant tearfully admitted that she had witnessed similar incidents in her career. The teen's name, Avery Langston, was spoken with reverence and curiosity. Everyone wanted to know how a young girl possessed such calm under pressure. Meanwhile, a dedicated website popped up, seatjustice.org. It offered a petition demanding nationwide anti-discrimination standards for all airlines. It invited users to share their own stories under the hashtag #MangSeatJustice. By evening, thousands of testimonies had been submitted. Parents wrote about their children being overlooked. Flight attendants shared regrets about past inaction. Frequent flyers described similar moments when entitlement overrode empathy. The site's manifesto read, "Everyone belongs wherever they are seated." On Capitol Hill, a senator introduced a bill. It called for Congress to authorize the Department of Transportation to enforce anti-discrimination protocols on commercial flights. The opening line echoed the viral video's most resonant quote, "No passenger should ever feel unwelcome or dismissed." Within 4 hours, the bill had attracted bipartisan co-sponsorship. It was a testament to how rapidly a single act could accelerate legislative action. Back in Chicago, Horizon Air's communications team drafted a comprehensive apology. It was to be released at noon local time. The email addressed customers by name, acknowledged the harm caused, outlined concrete steps for policy change, and invited feedback through an online portal. Marisol Vega personally signed the letter. She recorded a short video statement to accompany it, her eyes direct, her tone apologetic yet resolute. "We will lead this industry in equity and respect. We owe that to every traveler and to ourselves." On her private jet en route to a speaking engagement in Boston, Avery Langston's phone buzzed incessantly. She glanced at the stream of messages, congratulatory texts from friends, proud notes from mentors, invites from human rights organizations, and a formal request from a major talk show producer asking if she would appear to discuss her experience. Her mother, Camille, watched her daughter scroll with a mixture of awe and concern. "This is a lot. Honey," she said softly. "You don't have to do everything." Avery paused at a text from her father. "Everything you say next will matter. Speak your truth. Change starts when people listen." She read it twice, then sighed. "I know," she whispered. In her hotel suite, she opened her laptop and drafted a public statement. It began simply, "Last night I sat in my rightful seat. Instead of stepping aside, I stood in my own power." Then she outlined her hope that airlines would adopt stronger anti-discrimination measures, that fellow passengers would speak up when they saw injustice, and that young people everywhere would know their worth. She reminded readers that change often starts with a single act of quiet courage. She posted it as a thread on the same platform that had first amplified her. The thread went live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Within minutes, it amassed thousands of likes and retweets. Influencers quoted her lines. News sites embedded her statement in headlines. Schools and community centers shared her words in discussion groups. She felt a swell of responsibility, but also gratitude. A lone video of a teen refusing to be erased had become a catalyst for conversation across the globe. Meanwhile, in a suburban living room, a man watched the video with his teenage daughter, who had just returned from her first college campus visit. She was applying to music conservatories like Avery. He put his arm around her. "You can do that, too," he said softly. "You can stand up and know your worth." She nodded, eyes bright with newfound conviction. Across the ocean, a flight attendant in London's Heathrow lounge watched the clip on her iPad. She had been rebuked for not intervening years ago. Tears welled in her eyes. She tapped the screen and shared the video with her colleagues. "This is how we should act," she whispered. "This is who we should be." By nightfall, the video was still streaming, still climbing in views, still sparking debates in cafes and boardrooms alike. The overnight headlines read, "Teenager sparks global movement against air travel discrimination." Opinion columns praised her poise, challenged corporate inertia, and called for lasting reform. Social media polls showed overwhelming support for stronger passenger protections. The story had legs. It would not fade with time. In a quiet convent in Rome, a student priest read the story and smiled. He shared it with his mentor, who quoted the early Christians' teaching that every soul is equal in the eyes of justice. In Johannesburg, a youth group leader showed the video to her class, who discussed entitlement and power. In Sydney, a community center played the clip at their evening gathering on social equity. The ripple effect continued, crossing continents, cultures, and languages late that night, as stars glimmered above city lights. Avery Langston lay in bed, exhausted but alive with possibility. She remembered every moment of the flight, the man's demand, the crew's hesitation, the captain's intervention, Nolan Carr's apology, Brenda's remorse, and the viral clip that changed everything. She saw the faces of strangers who had chosen to believe her, to stand with her. She understood that a seat was not merely a cushion. It was a symbol of belonging, of respect, of humanity. She whispered a prayer of gratitude. Tomorrow she would return to her school, resume violin practice, and continue her philanthropy. But she also knew that she would never be the same. The world had seen her courage, and she had seen theirs, and in that shared vision, she found hope. 3 months had passed since Flight 418's dramatic standstill above the Rockies. In that time, the Langston family had launched the Avery Langston Music Initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing instruments and performance spaces to underprivileged youth. Today marked the groundbreaking ceremony for the first community music center, located on the former site of the Ormsley Estate, once owned by the family of Brent Calloway's in-laws. A crisp fall breeze carried the scent of freshly turned earth and oak leaves. A long white tent sheltered a row of gleaming folding chairs, filled with local dignitaries. students in crisp jackets, and representatives from Horizon Air and the Port Authority. A red ribbon snapped across the entrance to the construction site. A podium stood at the front, flanked by two giant flower arrangements. Behind them, the old stone manor had been raised, foundations exposed. Camille Langston stood beside her daughter, Avery, who gripped her violin case like a talisman. Both wore matching navy coats embroidered with the Music Initiative logo. Smiles danced on their faces, though nerves jittered under the surface. This was more than a ceremony. It was proof that a moment of injustice could spark real, tangible change. A hush fell as Marisol Vega, CEO of Horizon Air, took the podium. She cleared her throat and adjusted the microphone. "Welcome, everyone," she began, voice warm and confident. "Today we gather not to mourn what was lost, but to celebrate what we will build. 3 months ago, a young woman refused to give up her seat in first class, reminding us all of the importance of dignity and equality." She paused, gesturing to Avery. That young woman inspired an initiative to bring music and opportunity to those who need it most. Today we see the first fruits of that inspiration. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Avery felt a swell of pride. Behind the tent, tractors and excavators lay idle, orange flames of machinery quieted. Soon they would roar to life. But for now, the moment belonged to the people. Camille stepped forward. When Avery came to me after her ordeal, she didn't ask for fame or reward. She asked how we could help others avoid the pain she experienced. Her voice cracked slightly. She swallowed and continued. "We decided to transform a symbol of privilege into a sanctuary of creativity. This community center will house rehearsal rooms, instrument workshops, and performance halls. It will be a place where every child, regardless of background, can discover the power of music." Polite applause echoed. Avery moved next to the podium, violin case in hand. She opened it carefully, retrieving her instrument and bow. She drew a deep breath, glancing at her mother for reassurance. Camille gave her an encouraging nod. Avery's bow touched the strings, and a single pure note filled the air. Heads turned. Conversations halted. That note stretched and blossomed into the opening movement of a concerto she had composed for this day. Each phrase wove through the crisp air, a tapestry of resilience and hope. Children in the front row leaned forward, eyes shining. A few adults closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. When the final chord faded, Avery lowered her violin and faced the crowd. "Music taught me to listen," she said quietly. "Not just to notes, but to people. Today we remember that every voice matters. Every story deserves to be heard. No matter where you start, you can create something beautiful." Her voice wavered, but she held steady. "Thank you for believing in this vision." Thunderous applause followed, mingled with cheers and whistles. Avery placed her violin back in its case. She felt a tug on her sleeve and turned to see Nolan Carr holding a small wooden box. He offered it to her. Inside lay a brass key engraved with the center's name. "For you," he said softly. "To open the first door." Avery accepted it with reverence. She slipped the key into her pocket and turned to watch as Marisol and Camille took the oversized ceremonial scissors and cut the red ribbon. The crowd surged forward, applauding and rushing to tour the exposed foundation. Avery and Camille followed, stepping over wooden planks and gravel. At the back of the site, a row of young violinists from local schools waited. They had been invited to play alongside Avery. As she approached, they bowed in unison. Avery greeted them warmly, and they launched into a lively folk tune. Their bows soared together, a living testament to how far music could bring people. After the performance, Camille found a quiet corner near the scaffolding. She turned to Avery, eyes bright. "Look at them," she said. "That is what you tried to take by shrinking. And now look at them, because you stood tall." Avery smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It was never just about me or that seat. It was about every kid who thought they didn't belong, or who was told they didn't belong." She looked out at the workshop tents where charity volunteers had set up instrument clinics. "It's about building a place where they know by experience that they do belong." Nearby, Miles Tran recorded the event. He set his camera on the keystone of the foundation where the engraved cornerstone had been placed Avery Langston Music Initiative. Underneath read, "No seat shall define your song." He captured the moment when Ava Lopez, a 10-year-old cellist from the neighborhood, stepped forward and placed her bow on the wood, creating a low, resonant hum. Others joined flutes, drums, guitars, a spontaneous chorus rising from the excavated ground. Camille joined Ava on the foundation slab, gently guiding her hands. "Play for all the children still waiting," Camille said. Ava nodded solemnly, her bow gliding, the music intertwined, a river of notes flowing through the hearts of those watching. Later, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across yellow construction helmets and steel beams, Avery and Marisol shared a quiet conversation beside the worksite office trailer. Marisol handed Avery a folder. "This contains the finalized corporate pledge," she said. $20 million over 10 years to fund this and future centers. It's what our board approved after last night's vote." Avery's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say you believe in the power of music," Marisol replied, "and that you believe in the power of standing up." They embraced, the amber light framing them like a painting of hope. As the ceremony wound down, guests gathered for cocktails under twinkling string lights hung between construction cranes. Rolls of blueprints lay on tables alongside hors d'oeuvres. Avery wandered among her new collaborators, architects, music teachers, philanthropists, each offering excited congratulations and eager to pitch ideas. Camille found her daughter and slipped her hand in hers. "You've built something real," she said. "More than a building, a future." Avery nodded, overwhelmed by gratitude. She breathed in the crisp evening air, tasting possibility. She remembered the humiliation in her first seat, the way she had felt invisible and small. Now she felt seen. She felt heard. She felt home. In the glow of that construction site turned sanctuary, Avery Langston realized that what had been taken from her, her confidence, her sense of belonging, had been returned tenfold. In fact, it had multiplied, blooming into a community that would continue to grow long after her violin's final note had faded. And in every stone laid and every song played here, the lesson endured: never let anyone take your place, your power, or your promise. The early morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling window of the Horizon Air headquarters. Avery Langston stood in the corner of a quiet conference room, looking out at the city's skyline. Below her, traffic flowed like arteries of purpose, buses and taxis ferrying people who likely knew nothing of her story. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, recalling every moment that had led her here just over 3 months ago. She had boarded Flight 418 with a single violin case and a heart full of hope. No one had known her name. No one had expected her to fight. Yet her quiet resolve had set in motion a chain reaction that reshaped corporate policy, inspired legislation, and launched a foundation that would bring music to countless lives. She had learned then that true power did not roar. It whispered, it listened, it healed, and it endured. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Camille Langston stepped inside, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of quiet strength. She carried 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her daughter. Avery wrapped both hands around the warm cup, savoring the moment. "Ready for your final meeting?" Camille asked gently. Avery nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Camille smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Avery's face. "You've done more than anyone could ask. Today is about launching the Independent Ethics Oversight Committee. You'll be its honorary chair." Avery took a slow breath. "Honorary chair," she repeated softly. "I like that." They walked down the corridor together. Sunlight gleamed off polished floors. Portraits of former executives lined the walls. Today, one more portrait would join them, a photo of Avery seated in seat 1A, violin in hand, dignity intact. They entered a large room filled with chairs arranged in a semicircle around a low wooden table. A plaque gleamed at the center. Ethics Oversight Committee. Members filed in, representing flight crews, corporate leadership, passenger advocacy groups, legal experts, and community leaders. Names like Nolan Carr, Marisol Vega, and Captain Theodore Langley took their seats alongside representatives from civil rights organizations. The energy was calm yet electric, as if everyone present understood the gravity of the moment. Nolan Carr rose and tapped a glass to gain attention. "Welcome, everyone," he began. His voice was warm, confident, infused with purpose. 3 months ago, a single moment tested our values. Today, we formalize our commitment to ensure that equality and dignity guide every decision we make. He gestured toward Avery. "To lead us in this endeavor, it is my privilege to introduce our honorary chair, Miss Avery Langston." Polite applause filled the room. Avery stepped forward, setting her coffee down. She looked at each committee member in turn, letting their faces register in her memory. They had come from different backgrounds, united by a shared vision. She felt their expectation as a gentle pressure, not a burden, but a bond. "Thank you all," she began, her voice steady. "When I boarded Flight 418, I had no idea the seat I held would become a symbol of something much larger. At first, I saw only my own fear and frustration. Then I realized that seat was not just a cushion. It represented respect, safety, and the right to be seen." She paused as her gaze swept across the room. "I stood up because I refused to be invisible, but I also stood for every person who had ever been dismissed or diminished." Her words hung in the air. She continued, "This committee will ensure that our airline remains a place of welcome for all. We will review every policy, every training module, every procedure through the lens of equity. We will listen to passengers and employees alike. We will investigate every complaint with transparency, and we will hold ourselves accountable to the highest standard." There was a sense of unity now, a shared commitment. Marisol Vega stepped forward with a folder. "Miss Langston, on behalf of the board, I present this charter outlining our goals and responsibilities." She handed the document to Avery, who accepted it with reverence. Avery opened the folder and read aloud selected passages. "We pledge to implement mandatory bias training, to establish anonymous reporting channels for discrimination, and to publish an annual equity report accessible to the public." She looked up, meeting Nolan's eyes. "We also pledge to engage community partners to advise us, so our policies reflect diverse voices." Captain Langley nodded from his seat. He rose and addressed the group. "I will ensure every flight crew receives scenario-based training rooted in empathy and respect. No pilot should ever hesitate to defend a passenger's rights." His voice resonated with authority. Camille watched her daughter, pride shining in her eyes. She whispered, "You're changing the world in the same way you play your violin." Avery smiled, her heart fluttering with emotion. Nolan Carr closed the meeting with final remarks. This is not the end of a process. It is the beginning of a culture shift. With Miss Langston's leadership, we will redefine power in aviation silent, steady, and driven by justice. The committee members rose in unison and joined hands across the semicircle. Avery squeezed Nolan's hand before returning to her seat. The meeting ended, and the members gathered for photos. Cameras clicked, laughter and warm conversation filled the space. Avery stepped back and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought of the girl who once clutched her violin case on Flight 418, trembling with uncertainty. She thought of the man who demanded her seat. She thought of the captain who intervened, the ethics director who apologized, the airline that changed, and the foundation that grew. Her phone buzzed with messages, a note from a teacher telling her students were inspired, an invitation to a global summit on equity, a thank you video from a mother's group in Tokyo. Her words had traveled beyond borders, beyond time zones, beyond expectations. Camille approached, handing her daughter the small brass key from the music center. A reminder, she said, of where it started. Avery held the key close, feeling its weight. It was small, but heavy with meaning. They walked toward the exit, shoulders squared and hearts full. In the lobby, a giant poster displayed Avery's portrait beneath the caption, "Power Redefined, Silent Strength That Changed an Airline." As they stepped outside, the sun was high in the sky. A Horizon Air shuttle bus swept by. A flight crew walked across the plaza, greeting passengers. In a moment of quiet clarity, Avery realized that the real journey was not measured in miles flown, but in the countless lives touched by her stand. She turned to her mother, eyes bright. "We did it," she said softly. Camille squeezed her hand. "You did it," she corrected. "You redefined power." Avery closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. The wind carried the promise of tomorrow. She had learned that true power is not taken by force, but given by those who believe in your worth. It whispers in acts of kindness, resonates in voices raised for justice, and endures in hearts changed forever. And as she walked into the future, Avery Langston carried that power with quiet grace. Knowing that every time someone took a seat, they earned it with dignity. They carried her story and her courage into their own lives. Avery Langston's stand in first class reminds us that respect and equality are not optional. They are our shared birthright. Her courage teaches us to listen with empathy, to challenge injustice, and to reclaim our own seats at life's table. As we close this chapter, let us honor her strength, reflect on the harm caused by silent bias, and commit to speaking up whenever we witness unfairness. If you felt inspired by Avery's story, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep this conversation alive and make every flight, every school, and every community a place where every voice is heard and valued. Stay tuned for more stories that celebrate courage, challenge prejudice, and light the path toward a more just world.